Thank you very much, Stefan, for your invitation to be part of this symposium. I think along with Sam Jacobs, I understood that it was all about the Weissenhof, so maybe we are bad readers of emails or something. But I'm very happy to participate in this very exciting and thought-provoking conference. I took the topic of health, particularly of tuberculosis. As you know, architecture has always been understood in terms of a body, but it's always this very athletic, white, male body that is endlessly redrawn from the Renaissance to modern architecture, from, let's say, from Leonardo to Le Corbusier. This is a perfected body that is inscribed in a geometric system. And yet, the point that I'm going to make very briefly here is that the real body of architecture is not a healthy body at all, but a fragile body, prone to disease or already sick, and in need of support. And that in many ways, architecture is kind of an orthopedic support, a kind of crutch or an artificial skin for this fragile creature. And architecture discourse from the beginning, I mean from Vitruvius, that argued that architecture also be studied in medicine, is medical. So the architect is always presented as a kind of doctor and the building as a medical instrument. In fact, you can even argue, going back historically, that illness and architecture have always been inseparable. The beginning of architecture is the beginning of disease, as this fellow, Dr. Benjamin Ward Richardson, already say when introducing this book, Our Homes and How to Make Them Healthy, which is, by the way, a compendium of tests by doctors and by architects for the 1884 International Health Exhibition in London. And you can see the exhibition and some of the displays that all have to do with the house and how to make it healthy, including the equipment. But let me go to the point where he says precisely that man, in constructing protection from exposure, has constructed the conditions of disease. So, in fact, what he's saying is that there is no disease without architecture and no architecture without disease. And of course, furniture, as the ones in the exhibition, buildings, cities, etc., are in many ways the product of medical emergencies that layer on top of each other over the centuries. But it's amazing that we tend to forget very quickly what produced these layers. As soon as an epidemic passes, we develop all of us collective amnesia. From there, of course, the surprise when seeing these incredible images of these cavernous spaces all over the place. This one in Madrid, but they were in Belgrade, they were all over during COVID, filled with beds, but it's not the first time that we had been there, right? This is 1918 during the flu epidemic in the United States. Again, cavernous spaces were filled with beds. Or the shock when we were asked to put a mask, but the masks that we were wearing during COVID are not very different than the masks the nurses here in Boston were using during the flu epidemic all over the place, right? So in many ways, this is the point I'm trying to make, is modern architecture, we tend to forget that was also produced somehow under emergency conditions. Not only the 1918 flu, but most important, I think, tuberculosis. Throughout the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, millions were dying of tuberculosis every year all over the world. So if we think that COVID is bad, that's nothing. 1 in 7 in the planet were dying of tuberculosis, and in cities like Paris it was 1 in 3, right? So we are talking about a major problem. And then modern buildings offer themselves as a prophylactic, if you want, defense against these invisible microorganisms. All the defining features of modern architecture that you can think about, wide walls, terrace, big windows, detachment from the ground, were presented as both prevention for tuberculosis and cure for tuberculosis. I mean, Le Corbusier, for example, in the Radiant City, talks about historic Paris as tubercular Paris. So it's always clearly the rationale for the destruction of the center of Paris is tuberculosis, in the same way that Barcelona's many avenues or we talked about this morning about the Booth Center, the steel in the 30s, how many buildings were destroyed. So, well, this is modern architecture, of course, which is completely a response to tuberculosis, sun, air, exercise, terraces, etc. So, to make it very quickly, we can argue that if the health exhibition in London was also an architectural exhibition, as you can see, the Weissenhof is, here in Stuttgart, you can argue that was a health exhibition. Every project explicitly or implicitly presented itself as a source of physical and mental health. It starts with the poster, which is, we never reflect on that, but it's very interesting that instead, the poster, instead of showing what modern architecture will be, it shows what it shouldn't be, right? What it shouldn't be, this Red Cross, in many ways we are still in the same arguments of 1884, out with fabrics, out with ornament, out with unventilated and dark interiors. So, in other words, in order to produce the idea of modern architecture as healthy, 19th century architecture and even Art Nouveau, because it's a bit of an Art Nouveau interior here, had to be demonized as nervous, unhealthy, and literally filled with disease, especially the bacillus of tuberculosis. The curative excess was itself treated as an infection. Modernizing architecture was first and foremost a form of disinfection, a purification of buildings, leading to a health-giving environment of light, air, cleanliness, and smooth white surfaces without cracks of devices where contagion may lurk. Peter Behrens actually was the only architect to make this explicit, even if he was not invited initially to the exhibition. He wrote to Mies. He had been, of course, Mies had worked for Peter Behrens, but it's Peter who wrote this letter to Mies van der Rohe, soliciting to be involved in the exhibition. And what does he argue? He uses health as his rationale. This is part of the letter. One hears so much about the Bourbon exhibition in Stuttgart. I understand that the execution organizations are in your hands. I would like to inquire whether it may be possible to put my idea of the terrace block into practice there. If ever this type of terrace block is translated into reality, I believe that it can do a great deal for the health of people. In particular, Behrens ends up focusing on the question precisely of tuberculosis. This is his building here, not the most iconic one. But I have tried for years to design a multi-story house which will be suitable to prevent the main diseases of the people and or to favor healing. So again, prevention and healing. To be effective against tuberculosis, it seems necessary that each apartment, even in a multi-story building, has a large open space under the open skies. Behrens, by the way, was only invited by Mies after Tessenov, Haring, and Mendelssohn had dropped out. So it was really a last-minute decision. But you can argue that in the end, all the houses of the exhibition offer these terraces, which are actually in many ways rooms for exercise, rooms for taking the sun, rooms sometimes can be closed with curtains. You have here Hansarun, Gropius with the curtains, Radin and Senek, even Mies, of course, had roof terraces, as you can see, that also with this canopy form a room. Here you have Gropius with the... So those are not terraces added to a building. They are really like almost part of the building. The walls have been taken out and replaced with curtains. In fact, and here is actually the one of Polzig, which is also interesting, that includes this typical chair for taking the sun, but also very much like an invalid's chair. But in fact, it was not just architects, but also critics and historians of architecture, that's like Siegfried Gideon, for example, that seemed to be advocating life in a sanatorium. It was in the early 80s in New York, when one still will go around to all bookstores to find books, that I found this little book that I didn't know of Gideon, and I took to, by the title, Befriede Wohnen, Liberated Dwelling, to see a book on the house. And you could see also the subtitle, light, air, opening, almost like the slogan of a sanatorium. And the interesting thing is that when I opened the book, I realized that more than half of the book was dedicated to hospitals, including Richard Docker here in Beiblingen, a few kilometers away from here, or the Zonnestraal of Docker and BUE in the Netherlands, again the Zonnestraal, or sanatoriums in Davos, like the Queen Alexander, or images, again Davos, or images of sunbathing, or stadia, or even tennis. And by the time I finally got to the houses, it was almost half of the book is over. I practically have forgotten already that I bought a little book on the modern house. And what happens, I go into the house and say, what's going on here? And I find myself like the client is sick, so the house itself is like a sanatorium, like in this Max Hafeli house in Zurich, right, of 1988, or it has been turned into gyms, like the Piscator house by Marcel Breuer in Berlin, with all the gymnastic equipment, or again, the Richard Docker terrace here in the Weissenhof with all the SSI equipment. And of course, it's not just Gideon, and perhaps much more significant in this context of the Weissenhof will be Richard Docker, which of course was the site architect of the Weissenhof, and he wrote this very influential book also the same year of the Weissenhof, 1927, a Terrassentrieb, which follows the terrace, the evolution or the development of the terrace in modern architecture from the hospital, from the Krankenhaus, from the sanatorium to the home, starting with his own sanatorium here in Beiblingen, and again with all this detail, and again going through all these sanatoriums, many of them, the same one that Gideon had presented, the Zonnestraal, or the Queen Alexander in Davos, and again these characters in Davos. And before we know, he's making this absolutely seamless transition between the terraces of sanatorium and the terraces of modern houses, with diagrams showing the penetration of the rays in modern sanatoriums and in modern terrace houses. And the book concludes again with a series of photographs of domestic terraces, again his own, Richard Docker's, his own house in the Weissenhof, or for example this one, Malete Stevens, Villa Noel, in years, again with the terraces where people could sleep outside, including this beautiful one designed by Pierre Sarraud, that is part of the Malete Stevens house, and the pool, and of course, you know, the client, Marie-Laure de Noëls, she was the daughter of a Jewish banker from Paris who died of tuberculosis, so there's a lot of also biographical aspects to all of this. When she was a child and she was sent to live in the countryside, and she in many ways commissioned this house for Malete Stevens as a form of prevention of illnesses like tuberculosis, and even had a personal trainer here, and Man Ray, this fantastic film of the house using very much exercise as part of this, well, it's very quick. In the end, Docker, as I say, was the site architect of the Weissenhof, and the whole way the settlement is perched on the edge of the hill to cast the sun resonates in many ways too with the sanatorium tradition of facing design. And in the end, I think what is crucial about the Weissenhof is that it's really one building, a single effect of modern health life. Thank you very much.